Building a scabbard for a long sword is something that I've wanted to do for a while, but haven't had the opportunity because I haven't had a long sword of my own. And this one actually doesn't belong to me. This belongs to Matt Jensen, another YouTuber, and he's graciously entrusted me with it. Where I am right now is I've got a scabbard that has the core, obviously. We've got a core in there. It is cut to the size that I want it to fit this sword. Now, when I'm doing scabbards, to be honest, I end up cutting a lot of different cores, and that's because it's hard to get like a perfect fit. And so let me tell you what I mean here. I have a few of them here. I hope I don't make it look so easy that you feel like I never make a mistake, because I do. And it's not really a mistake, but it's not a perfect fit every single time. So I end up making a few of them, and it's, although time consuming, it's probably the one thing that costs very, very little. So we're just talking about a couple pieces of wood, tiny bit of glue, some sandpaper. Takes some time, but you want one that fits very, very well. And let me show you what I mean. The whole time you're sanding it, you want to make sure that it's starting to fit. And you should wear gloves, because typically when the pieces are not glued together, you're going to be holding your scabbard like this, and if you slide the blade down, you're going to end up cutting your fingers. So because the two halves are not glued yet. Make sure you wear gloves, and then just while you're putting it together, check the fit. If it gets tight like this, like where this is really gets pretty tight here, and so you know that this is not going to be a perfect fit. You don't want it to be so tight that you can't draw it easily with one hand. If you have to really push it down there, I mean, this does fit. Something that's this tight is not something I'd prefer. The way I view it, it's going to be perfect if it slides in and out easily with one hand. And that probably means that if you were to hold it upside down, the sword would fall out of it, and that's okay. You want it to be loose enough to be able to draw it with one hand. This particular one is not too bad, but it's not perfect. The one that I went with eventually is this one. I could give you a comprehensive build, start to finish, of how I make a longsword scabbard, but I'm not sure that would help you too much, because it's sort of covering some old ground anyway. So what I hope to do instead is give you some tips and advice to help you build the best scabbard that you can build. So at this point, where we are with this one, it is ready to be laced in the back, just about, maybe slim down a little bit. I want to show you one other design I made, sort of experimental design. I took a piece of wood and I cut this design out of it, and I have ended up gluing it to the top of the core. But because it's so far above, I don't know if it would look very unusual. I don't know if we can get the leather to really be molded all the way so that you can see all these little shapes. Maybe, but I decided to set this one aside for right now. I think it's a pretty design, kind of interesting. It was a lot of work actually getting this piece cut out because it's a single piece, but I just wanted to show that to you as well. So we're going to stick to the tips and advice that I can give you, rather than just showing you from A to Z how to do it. One of the biggest differences between making an arming sword scabbard and, like this one, a longsword scabbard, is going to be the fact that you have lots of choices in terms of the belt configuration. I guess that's probably true as well with an arming sword, but there just seems to be so much variety in a longsword and how you're going to hold that longsword. A lot of that had to do with when the sword was actually in use and the type of style that was used at that time. There's so much variety out there. There's so many choices on how you can have this look. I'm going to stick to this lacing technique that I've used here in other videos. So I'm using these long pieces of leather, and we can attach these however we want to create designs underneath the leather. And of course, we're going to mold it again. These laces do actually have a function, and they can hold the belt in place. It's kind of like a little lip there that'll keep the belt from going above or below the line. Beyond that, from an aesthetic point of view, it's just they can really add a lot to the way that the thing looks. Cutting the leather to the right size has always been a little bit tricky, because when you have it in its natural form, it is very stiff. It's not supple at all. And it seems like it is good to have a good idea of how much leather you need. Otherwise, you're just going to end up wasting a lot. So usually the way I've gone about this is by actually taking a large piece of paper or taping a bunch of pieces of paper together to get a large piece of paper, and then cutting that paper to the right size, realizing, of course, that the leather is going to be a little bit thicker, and so it might require a little bit more. But at the same time, I found that my leather shrinks a lot more than I expect. It's so important to have it fit right. Just the same way that you want the sword to fit into the scabbard, you need to have the leather fit around your scabbard really well. And by that I mean not super tight, but it shouldn't be so loose that things overlap. It can be tough to strike that balance, getting it just the right size. That would be my advice on that, using a pattern that you've cut out so that you know how much leather you need. You can also use that pattern to figure out how many scabbards you can make on that same piece of leather by laying it across the leather and doing some measurements that way. So in the past, I've always told you that you got to be really careful that your fingernails are not too long when you're molding the wet leather, because you're going to leave an imprint wherever you press if you have your nail there. And so one of the things you could do is to get one of these. This is called a bone folder. It's made out of bone, and it's used, I guess, to fold paper. My wife got it at a scrapbooking store. It's a very useful way to get into those small areas and press really hard without worrying about leaving any marks. Sorry, I wish this was in better focus there, but I hope you get the point there. Since we've got the back laced on the scabbard, it's time to dye it, and this is definitely not one of my favorite parts because I've just not been really successful with this. My approach this time was to actually pour out a bunch of dye into a bowl, into this container, and then try to get the scabbard like completely covered if possible, just very quickly. I've received a lot of great feedback from people who've watched the previous videos who have provided various ways that we can apply the dye, and someone suggested spraying it on. That seems like an interesting approach that I might have to try next time. One thing that seems to prevent the dye from penetrating deep into the leather uniformly is probably just the surface. If there's any dirt or dust that is on the top layer, it's just going to prevent the dye from really penetrating the scabbard. So try to keep the leather as clean as possible. There might be a product that you could use to clean the leather if necessary. This one's not too bad. It has a few streaks in it, but it's really not that bad. Using the sponge actually, I think, was a pretty decent way to get it on there because we could just coat it really quickly before I'd use those wool daubers. At this point, we're going to get the chape on it, and I've picked up quite a few fittings and chapes and these brass components. The best ones have come from Todd's Workshop. Todd's Workshop is a great resource. Unfortunately, he's like the only resource. They make very, very high quality pieces. Todd does a great job with this product, so I would encourage you to check out his website if you've never done that before. Now, the actual chape will fit on just with friction. I mean, it's pretty tight just with friction, and if necessary, you can actually clamp it a little bit, bend the metal just slightly so it stays on. I'm going to make sure that we do our best to make sure it's going to stay there permanently. So I'm actually going to put some epoxy in the bottom of it. So I'll pour just enough in where I feel like it's not going to squeeze out. You definitely don't want that to happen. We don't want it to ruin the leather or the look of the leather. So just a little bit to fill the bottom inside the chape, and then we're going to slide it on. I wouldn't go overboard with the epoxy. You could use it, I suppose, to hold down the straps. You could use it various places, even at the mouth of the scabbard. You could do that, and it might work for you a little bit. But I feel like if you're using a lot of epoxy, it's just gonna look like it was made today rather than hundreds of years ago. For the straps themselves, what I've done is actually I've taken a piece of leather that will be enough for the straps, and before cutting it into individual pieces, I dyed it. And the reason I did this was that so the sides of the leather and the back of the leather wouldn't be dyed. There's not any particular functional reason for that or anything, but I think it has a striking appearance when you can see the side, which has like a light beige color, and then the top is black. I just think it offsets it pretty well and just gives it an extra. I don't know what it is. I think it looks a little bit better. Brass buckles are difficult sometimes. I started with this one and I just made a mess of it. Actually, this wasn't the very first one I started with. I think I ruined 3 or 4, maybe even 5 other buckles. Smaller ones, they're inexpensive, not a big deal, but it was just very difficult to set rivets. I ended up using Todd's rivets on the buckle end. I think it worked better than I had hoped, actually. So it's nice if you have separate rivets. It's just there's really I don't know of any place to buy these really besides Todd. I love seeing the work that some of you have done in terms of the scabbards that you've made. And, if you want to contact me through Facebook, I'm not on there very often, but I would love to see any kind of work you've done based on the videos that I've made for scabbards or anything else. I love seeing that. It's really encouraging to me to actually see someone else take my instructions and run with them. So thanks for watching today, guys. I'll talk to everybody soon.